I've been working in arts and cultural industries for well in excess of 30 years in the voluntary and public sectors. I have spent many years working in local authorities, and for example my work there was in Leicester was to deliver a cultural-led regeneration project to establish a cultural quarter in the heart of the city centre in an area that had fallen into decline as a result of the failing and declining textile industry. This saw some wonderfully imaginative projects come forward, like the Curve Theatre, which was a proposition to turn a theatre inside out, not unlike the building that we're in today, which is a factory for education and a factory to intersect with the communities that come into this part of Camden or live in this area. So very much akin to the sort of thing that I've been involved in. Before we sort of go into the case study, I'm just going to give a little bit of a context around UK City of Culture by talking and thinking about the European Capital of Culture programme, which was introduced in 1983 by the then serving Minister of Culture for Greece. And her concern was that Europe as a body was thinking about politics and economics, but not about the cultural aspects and dimensions of the Union. So she put forward a proposition that was taken forward in 1985 to establish the European City of Culture, as it was then called. It later became the Capital of Culture, the European Capital of Culture, under the presidency tenure of Germany in 1999. The first year was the first European City of Culture programme was held in 1985 in Athens, who were the first title holder. United Kingdom has held the European Capital of Culture twice, in 1990 in Glasgow and in 2008 in Liverpool. And it was very much the experience and the benefits and the outcomes of Liverpool's Year of Culture in 2000, Capital of Culture, that led to the UK introducing and developing the UK City of Culture programme. It's interesting to note that the Capital of Culture programme is about the celebration of the cultural identities of Europe, and therefore it should come as no surprise to us that when we leave the European Union in 2019, or is it 2020, or we're a little bit unsure about that, but we will no longer be eligible to participate in the European Capital of Culture programme. And that was noticed last year when Nottingham, Milton Keynes and a couple of other UK-based cities had their bids that they had invested time, energy and money in, and building community capacity to support those bids, were knocked back and told that they would no longer be taken forward because we were no longer part of Europe. So that's a shame, because I think European Capital of Culture provides an opportunity to develop not only the urban fabric of the environment, but also the community and societal aspects and economic dimensions of a locale. So, you know, that's a hugely missed opportunity for us. We will no longer be celebrating our cultural expression. You know, we are talking about London as the UK capital of culture, the world capital of culture in many respects, and no longer will we be part of Europe. Sorry, I should have done this. So the European Capital of Culture programme is really about the celebration of the diversity of the communities and their expression, and the interconnection between those diverse cultures, and creating opportunities for new cultural forms to come forward, and to foster urban renewal. There's always been, as part of European Capital of Culture programmes, an urban renewal programme. So, the rationale for establishing UK City of Culture was really about allowing other cities in and throughout the UK that would not feel able or want to participate in the European Capital of Culture programme, which has a much higher programme and a much more rigorous process and criteria for evaluation and contention, and therefore it would put a number of administrative areas out of the frame. So UK Capital of Culture was seen as an opportunity to take the benefits from 2008, generated in Liverpool, and use them and deploy those across a competing programme of UK cities. So the UK City of Culture proposition reflects the growing recognition of the potential of culture as a catalyst for urban regeneration and development. Since the 1980s, many decision makers have started to acknowledge that culture could help cities to diversify the local economic base and enhance social cohesion. There was also a growing recognition that culture could contribute to compensating job losses in traditional sectors and to attracting mobile international capital and skilled workers. This encouraged the proliferation of cultural strategies in the UK deeply committed to goals of urban regeneration and development. Many cities across the country engaged in processes of cultural-led regeneration where high-profile cultural activities functioned as catalysts for physical, economic and social regeneration. City of Culture. The UK City of Culture initiative was therefore envisioned with the aim of helping British cities to deal with structural socio-economic transitions to relaunch themselves in the light of the successful experience of Glasgow in 1990 and Liverpool in 2008. In stating the guidelines and criteria for selection, the DCMS, that's the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, required bidding cities to demonstrate the connection of the programme to local identity. They wanted to celebrate localness and distinctiveness of communities and its potential to produce social and economic impacts and step changes affecting and engaging a broad set of partners, stakeholders and audiences with the ability to deliver a programme that was within an affordable and reachable budget. And it was very much for the host city or the bidding city to decide what was an affordable budget. That wasn't something that was prescribed by the DCMS, because with all these programmes, there is rarely money that follows automatically. The host city, the designated city, has to generate the income and the budget to fund the programme that they'll go on to provide. So far within the UK City of Culture programme, and you know this because you read around these subjects, there have been 2 cities of culture within the UK. In the first year, 2013, Londonderry won the title, and in 2017, last year, as recent as that, Hull. And our next UK City of Culture will be 2022, I think it is, or is it 2023? 2023, and that's going to Coventry in the Midlands. So a very contrasting set of cities, all seizing the opportunity to use culture as a driver to regenerate their communities, their local environments, their public spaces and their cultural offer, and raise their profile nationally and internationally in the process. The London Borough of Culture programme is an initiative launched by the current Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, and he was motivated and inspired by both the European Capital of Culture programmes and the UK City of Culture programme. It is a way more modest programme, the budget associated with it, and there is a grant of £1.2 million that goes to the winning boroughs. And he has designated 2 London boroughs of culture, one in 2019 and one in 2020, to coincide with the end of his administrative year. The election of the mayor will be contested in, I believe it's in 2021. It's an ambitious programme, and it's intended to transform those places through arts, heritage and culture. And it's quite interesting that all of a sudden we start to see a split between arts, heritage and culture. Culture is arts and heritage. And I've lifted that as it's a straight quote from the prospectus that was put out to encourage bidders to submit their proposals for London Borough of Culture. it is an ambitious programme in that it's very, very tight. 2019 is the winning borough of Waltham Forest has less than 9 months now to plan their year of culture, and that's not a very long time in planning horizon times. If we just think about it, when we were looking at our bid in Camden, we were talking with the Roundhouse, and we said we're thinking maybe 19, maybe 20, and they said, well, our planning horizon is 2023. Organisations, cultural organisations, large institutions are often planning on 5-10 year horizon cycles, so makes it very difficult for them to engage in the delivery of the year in a very active and meaningful way. So there were the two London Borough of Cultures, so Waltham Forest in 2019 and Brent in 2020. Alongside that, there were 6 Cultural Impact Awards. They were described in the bidding process as exemplar projects, but they've turned out to be Cultural Impact Awards. 6 of them, Barking and Dagenham, Camden, Kingston, Lambeth, Lewisham and Merton, all receive a share of £1 million to deliver a specific project. Camden's project, which we'll come to towards the end of this presentation, is a project called Camden Alive, and we'll be working with partners at Central St Martin's and others throughout the borough. Again, the programme is expected to affect a long-term change in the way that communities and residents participate in culture in their boroughs and across the capital as a whole. So whilst it's designated as a borough programme, it is intended that the borough will attract people from outside that area as day visitors and as tourists to see their offer. The key programme objectives focus around the following themes: more Londoners involved and participating in creative activities. London has a huge proliferation of cultural assets and cultural activity. The majority of that activity is not necessarily enjoyed by the majority of London people. It's a small cohort of local people and visitors to the city that are participating in the cultural life of London. Places and boroughs where people are proud to live and work, a sense of location, a sense of belonging, a sense of identity. Key things that help communities to regenerate and feel they are part of somewhere that has a resonance to them. Strong partnerships between culture, business, community and voluntary sector enabled and established. So thinking about how do you bring forward new ways of working and how do you establish them for a sustainable period beyond the year of culture. Culture positioned at the core of local plans and strategic planning processes, thinking about how culture is woven through the fabric of activity of a local authority. So really thinking about how it impacts on health programmes, how it impacts on work with young people, how it impacts on housing, how it impacts on planning policies for licensing, building and urban renewal. So right across the full spectrum of local authority activity. Providing outstanding opportunities for outstanding artists to make exciting new work. So about risk-taking, about thinking about... The UK is renowned, London in particular, for the quality of its artists. So really thinking through how do we create opportunities that are amazing, that have a relevance back within local communities. Social connections between members of the community and intergenerational connections are created by taking part in cultural activity. And health and well-being through the arts and culture is improved. So they were the programme outcomes expected to be delivered. Thinking now about Hull City of Culture in 2017, it was Hull was designated the UK City of Culture for 2013. In 2013, November 2013, it was announced Hull would be the next City of Culture. It was announced, I don't know where the announcement was, I believe it was in Derry, but I can't be sure of that. It's interesting because if you talk with the leadership team around Hull City of Culture, they believe that it's actually a 4-year programme, because you have 4 years leading up to it, 4 years leading up to it, delivery year, and then 3 years before it's the next City of Culture's title. So it's an 8-year programme, but in real terms, it's a 4-year programme. And that's how Hull approached it, that it was a programme of cultural engagement over a 4-year time, which had a focus during 2017. The bid that Hull put together was particularly welcomed by the judging panel because of the extent of Hull's community engagement in the process of developing and submitting and creating the bid and the proposals contained within it. So very concerned about community engagement, really community at the heart. And there was a sense that Hull's bid was rooted in the local community. It was about, and it grew out of, local people. Do many of you know much about Hull? It's up on northeast, it's Yorkshire, on the other side of the Humber. But Hull has faced a series of specific social, economic and cultural challenges, which they use the UK City of Culture programme to respond to. I'm not going to say resolve, because that's a big ask of a cultural programme, but to respond to them and to help unlock some of those issues that were caused from low employment levels, a whole raft of things. I'll come on to those in a minute. They also had a well below average level of engagement and of participation in culture. So well below the national average. I think they were at or around 32% engagement in the arts. But the way that that data is collected doesn't allow you to work out whether that's 32% of the local community or whether it's 32% of the local community plus people, or does it come from just the local community or the East Riding and the surrounding areas. The City Council has made cultural regeneration the cornerstone of its 10-year plan for renewal of Hull. It's Hull's first cultural regeneration strategy, and this in itself is a step change for the city's attitude to using culture as a driver of change. Hull's ambition, vision and positioning for culture, alongside the demonstrable support of business, civic and community leaders and cultural organisations, was rewarded with the title Hull City of Culture 2017. Some characteristics about Hull. It's a resident population of about 260,000 with an increasingly diverse community, primarily new migrants from Eastern Europe, so lots of new influences coming in. Hull was badly bombed in World War II. It's still recovering from that devastation. It's lost its dockers, its fishing industry, and it's survived major floods. Suffers some of the highest levels of deprivation in the UK, and despite progress remains close to the bottom key league tables for employment, health, educational attainment, poverty and digital access. These are things which are impacting society, not in every quarter of Hull, but in particular parts. It's ranked 11th most deprived local authority district in England, and 44% of its residents have no qualifications. 38% of the working age population are claiming job seeker allowance, and a significant percentage are economically inactive due to long-term and life-limiting illness. Cultural participation is at 36%, 1% higher than I thought it was, which is below the national average, which is at 44%. London's rate is higher than that, because, as you would expect, because of the amount of culture that's on offer here. Hull has suffered with poor perceptions of the city, and here's a quote that from the Observer in 2013. Well, when Hull enters the national consciousness, it is usually as a totem of social deprivation. It's not something that people were proud and images were proudly communicated about. All of these factors have contributed to and foster an image of a city deeply related to poverty, deprivation, which in turn has discouraged people, skilled workers and investors to move or do business in Hull. So a bit of a downward spiral. Hull's themes and aspirations for their City of Culture year was they would have 365 days of transformative culture through a range of diverse and high-profile cultural events and projects, taking place in usual locations like theatres, galleries, but also in unusual places like community settings, highways, streets, housing estates, and on buildings. This is an image. This is an image of the opening, the launch night of Hull's City of Culture year back in January 2017, and it was a projection programme which was only up for a week, which was a shame because it was stunning, and I think a lot of people missed out on the opportunity to see this piece of work called Made in Hull, and they projected images on a range of civic buildings around the city in order to encourage people to look at the quality of the architecture, think about the stories of Hull, and to understand the journey that Hullensians have taken over time. It was really well received, but it's not available in any form to my knowledge. They had, sitting under those aspirations, they had themes around arts and culture. They wanted a high-quality exemplar programme of arts that would build new audiences and develop the local arts sector. They needed to create capacity to produce and make and present cultural artefacts, whatever that artefact might be. It could be an object, could be a piece of theatre, could be a play. Placemaking, they wanted to improve the perception of Hull within Hull, but also externally, because people have internally to Hull, local communities have poor views about the city itself, and really didn't feel proud of Hull. They wanted to boost the local economy by £60 million through the visitor economy, acting as a catalyst for wider investment and regeneration. So really thinking about how do we attract cultural tourists and what's the spend that's associated with it. So we're talking here 60 million is direct, indirect and induced spend. They wanted to improve well-being through programme engagement, increasing the skills, aspirations and knowledge of the local community. They wanted to provide a legacy by developing partnerships and to realise an exemplar programme. And they actually made some stunning achievements, and I'll come on to that in a minute. So Hull, interestingly, Hull bid to be UK City of Culture for 2013 in 2010. And they lost to Derry. And it was Derry's winning the contest that inspired them to remotivate themselves and bid again. So they invested in the process twice. This is a city who doesn't have a huge amount of capital and cultural assets at its disposal, and actually developing up bids to be City of Culture, they don't come cheap. They're hundreds of thousands of pounds to do the job, and in order to put your argument across and to demonstrate and to evidence your case. So it's a big investment for them to make, but they did it, and they did it on the basis of, and their slogan that they used extensively was Hull needs it, Hull wants it. And then when they got it, Hull's ready. The bid process, as I said, was respected for the way it connected with local communities, and it stimulated interest and enthusiasm amongst a wide cross-section of the city residents, although they doubted Hull would win. So the theme that they developed through this process was a city coming out of the shadows. Sitting in the shadow of other great Yorkshire cities. York, for one, There are many others. Leeds, another. The bid was developed by a team led by the council, working with partners, stakeholders. There was a huge array of local engagement. So I'm dripping because I'm conscious that I'm talking a lot. 4 themes were, the programme was developed around 4 themes: roots and roots, made in Hull, freedom and quirky. The themes of roots and roots was looking at the physical and the physical gateways into the city, but also the journeys of migration of communities coming to that. So it's exploring how people connected with the fabric of the city, how they connected with the history of the city, how they connected with the contemporary version of Hull that is today. Made in Hull was about recognising Hull's production base from theatre. They have the well-renowned Hull Truck Theatre, producing really interesting, thought-provoking, issue-based plays. They wanted to say and demonstrate that Hull is a place where new work has and is made and commissioned, whether it was Richard Wilson's slipstream sculpture for Heathrow Airport, or a new contemporary piece of writing at Hull Truck Theatre, or a new dance commission with Ballet Laurent, or silver jewellery made at the Awesome Gallery. Hull has also given birth and nurtured the talents of many writers, directors, musicians and artists. Freedom was a big message, and they have an annual Freedom Festival, and this is really thinking about open space, liberty and independence of thought. And it's interesting, independence of thought. Hull has their own telephone network. They're not part of the national telephone network. They've got cream or white, cream I think they are, telephone boxes. Not that you see many telephone boxes, but they have their own. A friend of ours moved up to Hull because they were working on UK City of Hull, and the boiler in her house was specific to Hull. It was only manufactured in Hull, and it some weird things, but a real sort of like strong independent sense there, I think. And I'm thinking about the theme recognises the contribution of Hull and Wilberforce in the freedom movement, but also about the sense of space, light and independence of thought held by Larkin, Hockney and many other artists that have worked in the city's environments. Quirky, a city of surprises, risk-taking and offbeat humour. Often phrases used to describe Camden, the borough that we're situated in now. The theme celebrates Hullness, from white phone boxes to the Museum of Club Culture, Larking's Toads and Theatre in Gardenshed. Hull dares to be different. For example, Coombe Transmissions, founded in Hull by artist Genesis P. Orridge and Cozy Fanny Tutu, a subversive collective that took the art world by storm in the late 60s, ahead of their later involvement in the musical collective Throbbing Gristle. For those of you that are studying appreciation, you might want to look at Cozy Fanny Tutu, and as part of the Year of Culture programme, it's a collective, they had the inaugural exhibition of a new gallery that was created in the Fruit Market area, which is emerging as a cultural quarter in a found space, and subsequently is going to be established as a permanent gallery facility. But they went back several years on to show a retrospective of their work from those early days in the 70s. They also thought and introduced an additional cross-cutting theme of Hull 2017 as the Green City, thinking about this being the year that the green and environmental agenda is promoted and celebrated through the City of Culture programme. I'm going to move on. As I said earlier, the City of Culture year has really just finished in December 2017. They have already, I'll come to that in a minute, but they have already produced an initial set of findings from the Year of Culture programme. But before I go on to that, I just wanted to go through some of the financial stuff, because when they submitted their bid, they developed it on the basis that they would create, from a variety of sources, a budget of about £18 million. They exceeded that budget by achieving a target of £32.5 million. That was at the start of the year, and as they were progressing through the year, they were still fundraising for activity during the year, but also for the legacy years that would come after. So where did this £32.5 million come from? I said earlier that there was no money that followed the Year of Culture programme. They interestingly managed to receive £21.6 million from Public, Treasury and Arts Council England and other lottery sources. So the public purse put £21.6 million in, despite no budgets following the Year of Culture programme. They raised an impressive £3.9 million from trusts and foundations. That's charitable trusts and foundations. And this is an absolute incredible achievement when you think about a declining industry base, a lack of tradition of business sponsorship for culture. They raised £6.9 million from corporate and business sources. I think that's huge. I think that is such a big achievement. That's massive. That's more than, sorry.
And do you know, was that local business or was that also?
It was because they've got they've got local businesses like Siemens that obviously have national, international. But yeah, I mean, I have got a list. I took it out because I needed to shorten this, but I did have a list of all of the sources that came from. But you know, Siemens invested, and other national companies that are based in Hull. But it was mainly local money, and they were investing in it because they could see that there would be benefit by raising the profile of Hull, by attracting students to Hull, by attracting businesses, other businesses to Hull, by attracting tourists. It would develop the local economy, and it would give them access to better skilled workers, etc., etc. So there is a motivator behind it that goes is you know, beyond just doing it because it's a good cause. In terms of capital, we talked about community and we've talked about physical renewal. In terms of capital, they invested £11 million to refurbish Hull New Theatre. That didn't open until 2016. The Ferrens Art Gallery, beautiful little art gallery, underwent a refurbishment programme of £4.5 million. And the fruit market is being developed on an incremental and organic basis. And that, you know, there was some initial money in the fruit gallery. But importantly, the council invested around £100 million in the public spaces. So thinking about how people move through and the quality of that public realm environment. That included a programme of temporary art installations as well as laying new surfaces, but really thinking about how the city connects and unites around it. They also saw new C4DI workspaces, and that's essentially kind of like looking at digital technologies and digital industries. They have established legacy. They've established Hull 2017 will cease to trade in a little while. They've formed a new cultural trust to take the legacy forward. They've got a budget of £9 million secured for legacy, which is negligible in some ways in comparison to the 32.5 in 1 year, because that £9 million is for the period 2018 to 21, so it's a 3-year, so it's only £3 million a year. It's still a lot of money, but it's only a tenth of what they had in the Year of Culture. The new company's been formed. They've recruited new chief executive, new creative director, and other staff. They are, as I understand it, they are preparing to announce their legacy plans, their project proposals, next month, May, as I understand it. So what did Hull want to, and I'm just going to trot through these because I think it's important before we look at the outcomes. Hull wanted to achieve a 7% increase in cultural participation by Hull residents. 7%. So they wanted to go from 36% to 43%, sorry. They wanted the impressions and perceptions of Hull to have changed and a 400% increase in positive media coverage, improved resident and visitor satisfaction with Hull. Economic impact worth 60 million delivered through the year with an increase in the cultural economy. 1 million extra visitors will visit Hull during the year. 84 new permanent jobs in the cultural and visitor economies created. A city in a better position to attract inward investment, increased capacity within the creative and cultural industry sectors, and that every young person of school age would have the opportunity to participate in the UK City of Culture programme. This image is by an international artist. It was part of Hull has a programme called, are you familiar with the Creative People and Places programme that's run by the Arts Council, which looks at, invests in areas where there are low participation rates. Hull has a Creative People and Places project, and this was a piece of work by an artist called Silvio Palladino, working with Thornton Council Estate, which is on the main road into the city. This building is evident. It's very simple. It's using the balconies and the lighting on those balconies. He's used theatrical gels, and the residents of each that belong to each balcony have chosen the colour of the gel that goes in. It was so well received that they've rolled it out across Hull, and they're thinking about how they can take the project across the M62 corridor between Hull and Leeds as part of the legacy programme. But that's communities engaged directly in delivering. So what are the preliminary outcomes from the City of Culture programme? They delivered 365 days of culture. They established a budget of 32.8 million. They attracted a total audience of 5.3 million, of which just shy of 51% were from Hull, 27.5% were from East Yorkshire, so technically tourists, and just shy of 21% from elsewhere in the UK, less than 1% from overseas. These are the initial findings. They've been validated by the consultants that were appointed to do the evaluation, but there is more work that will be done, and I think they're looking to produce their final report during next year, by autumn next year. The total number of annual visitors in 2017 is projected to be 1.3 million greater than in 2013. I don't have the figure for 2013, sorry. And the projected value of tourism in 2017 is on track to contribute more than 300 million to the local economy. We said their ambition was 60. They're on track for 300 million. Nearly 800 new jobs have been created in the visitor and cultural sector since 2013. Bearing in mind, they see it as a programme over 4 years. As a direct result of investments totalling over 219 million, which are fully or partly attributable to Hull's UK City of Culture status. Half of the audiences were from Hull, with 95% of all residents attending at least one cultural activity during the year, and 3 in 4 residents are now proud to live in Hull. They're proud of their city. Hull achieved significant national media attention, securing over 20,200 pieces of media exposure across print, online and broadcast media outlets. Many of the audiences were new to Hull's cultural offer, with over 60% of ticket purchasers being first-time bookers. Record audience figures of over 1.4 million recorded at the city's galleries and museums, plus an increase in ticket sales of more than 30% at the city's major theatres and performance venues. Anecdotally, the Ferrans Art Gallery had been closed. It opened in January as a refurbished gallery, and in that first week in January 2017, they reported attendance, visitor numbers, in that 1 week in excess of visitors over the course of a normal year. In 1 week. That's amazing. And they were local audiences. What that demonstrates is local people engaging in the cultural life of the city. 465 new pieces of work were created against an initial ambition of 60, and the cultural programme received an average quality rating of between 8.5 and 9.5 out of 10 by audiences. So the audiences were rating the quality and they're measuring that. 9 in 10 cultural organisations said support received in 2017 enabled them to do something new, which they would not otherwise have done. And 87% feel optimistic about the future of the local cultural sector. One of their ambitions was to build the capacity of the sector. City increase in residents' pride and media. 75% of presidents are proud to live in Hull. 1 in 2 commissions were inspired by Hull's heritage, and 3 in 4 residents feel their knowledge of Hull's history has increased as a result of the programme. Of those who visited Hull in 61% stated they were likely or very likely to return, and 8 in 10 said the cultural programme provided them with a different experience of Hull. So it brought something fresh and different. The value of media coverage is estimated to be in the region of £450 million. Looking at Hull's economy, 800 new jobs were created in the visitor and economy. And yeah, we've just done that one. 1 in 4 businesses surveyed in Hull and East Riding took on new staff in 2017, and 1 in 5 businesses extended opening hours. 64% of businesses who made an investment during 2017, so that's the business sponsorship and donations, said it was a higher value as a result of UK City of Culture, and 72% made this investment sooner than planned. The question is, will they make it again? I suppose. But that's something that this needs to look at in the next phase of evaluation. Funding for local cultural activity grew in the build-up to 2017, with successful Arts Council England applications increasing by 346%. Arts Council investment had been at a comparatively low level because there was a comparatively low level of activity. So it generated new ideas, ideas that were worthy of Arts Council support. From the society and wellbeing perspective, 8 out of 10 participants stated that being part of the project made them feel happier. Over 100 education institutions took part in Hull City of Culture 2017's Learning and Participation Programme, No Limits, reaching 56,000 children and young people. As a result of taking part, 40% felt happier and 63% felt encouraged to take part in creative activities in the future. They had an enormous target to achieve volunteer effort. They were looking to create a bank of 2,400 volunteers, which they did, who provided 337,000 volunteer hours during the course of the year. They've worked it out what that means in years. It's 38.5 years worth of volunteering activity. That's an enormous amount, and there's a value to that. There's a value. I think they'll look at the value. You know, you can work out the value of volunteering to a cultural programme. And I understand that the volunteering effort is continuing, and that there's a core team now of volunteers who want to continue to do the sort of thing they did during City of Culture. Partnerships and development. Hull's Year of Culture accelerated or attracted new funding for major cultural projects in the city, with more than 48 million invested by Hull City Council in public realm enhancement and major developments around Ferrens Art Gallery and Hull New Theatre. Right, so some impressive stuff there, and way beyond the expectations that I think Hull had, and I think also way beyond that the sponsors, the DCMS, had when they appointed Hull, because they've exceeded everything that they said that they would do. And I think that's about, they had the strength of leadership and the quality of the creative team that they brought in, and the quality of the vision that was established, and the quality of rooting the project in communities. And we shouldn't underestimate it, because if we don't have audiences, if we don't have participants, then why are we doing it? In the last 5 or 10 minutes, I think, I'm just going to, as you know, Camden submitted proposals to be one of the London boroughs of culture. It was not successful in that bid. Notwithstanding that, it did secure a Cultural Impact Award. As I mentioned earlier, London Borough of Culture programme is way more modest than the UK City of Culture programme, has a shorter lead in time, and therefore the opportunity that it presents is very different. And it's necessarily very different because London is unlike the rest of the UK. But its main purpose is to transform places through arts, heritage and culture, activity and enterprise. I think the London Borough of Culture programme coincided with Camden's desire for a cultural framework and commitment to creativity across all council services. Camden had been talking about, really thinking about how it positions culture within the organisation, but more importantly within the borough and within the communities of borough. The communities of the borough, and therefore that brought with it a high level of support for Camden's aspiration from artists, cultural, education, health providers and communities, businesses, private sector and media. So there was a good groundswell of activity, but the timeline that we were working to meant that we were able to work with those that relationships were already established with, and it wasn't possible because the time is very short. You know, the announcement was in July, and the bid had to be submitted by the December. It did mean that we weren't able to go beyond the usual suspects and work with some of the easy to ignore residents and communities in the borough. When I say easy to ignore, you may be familiar with phrases like harder to reach or hard to reach communities. I personally prefer easy to ignore because it places the responsibility with the cultural provider, whereas hard to reach suggests the problem is theirs and it's nothing to do with us. So I've started to adjust my language over recent months to think about easy to ignore communities. Camden's bid for London Borough of Culture was framed by two areas of policy. And you may have come across this, you may have heard about this as you're studying in Camden, but Camden 2025, the new strategic vision for the borough, it's led by the council, but it's not delivered exclusively by the council. It sets out a bold set of ambitions, acknowledging Camden as a progressive place characterised by neighbourliness and a sense of shared community where diversity is valued. Camden 2025 highlights the optimism which exists in local communities, recognising the unparalleled green spaces and iconic cultural and heritage assets forming a sense of place and identity, which makes it an amazing place to grow up, live and work in. A call to action ambition is that by 2025, everyone in Camden will contribute to their communities, making them safe, strong and open places to live and work. And Camden Council is also in the process of developing its cultural framework. And that framework was taken to Cabinet in March this year, and it was agreed as a basis for further consultation with residents and cultural organisations, and that programme will roll out over the coming months with a view to take the final cultural framework to Cabinet for endorsement at the end of this year, beginning of the next calendar year. The emergent framework that we're going to be consulting on is a vision for a London borough shaped and inspired by its culture, a place where the arts, creative industries, heritage, libraries and museums are part of everyday lives and are evident wherever we go and in everything that's done. Acknowledging the strong role that culture can play in place shaping social and economic priorities of Camden Council. To shape and bring focus and ownership and to promote the development of Camden's bid for Year of Culture, we brought together a cross-section of cultural organisations and providers to form an advisory group, and one of your colleagues was a member of that advisory group. I can't remember her surname, Monica.
Handel.
Yeah, Monica Handel, who's one of your lecturers, yes? Colleagues, one of your colleagues. She was a part of that advisory group, and so she was involved in helping to shape the bid that we ultimately submitted. We recognise that the London Borough of Culture was a once-in-a-generation opportunity. It may never happen again. It's part of Sadiq Khan's ambition to place culture at the centre of London's development and the agendas of the Greater London Authority. An incoming mayor may not be persuaded to adopt the same approach to culture as he has. We don't know what's going to happen there. I'm not going to second guess that. But it's a once in a lifetime opportunity. It will potentially never happen again. And if you do it once and you're not successful, or you do it and you get it, you don't get to repeat it too often. We also saw it was a great opportunity to establish some new partnerships and look at ways of working in partnership, not just with the usual suspects of cultural organisations, but thinking about how residents and local people and communities can be co-creators and how they can be engaged in the creation of work and its exhibition. We also wanted to think about how the project also thought about how we used other agencies working across social and public policy areas. So how we worked with the Health Partnership, for example. We recognised that a multi-agency partnership approach formed during the development of the bid, but also during the delivery year, would leave a legacy that would live on beyond, and therefore provide a basis for working up proposals through the cultural framework. We held a series of ideas generation workshops that involved residents, organisations, cultural providers, other stakeholders. We had artist-led creative consultation sessions taking place in unusual locations across and around the borough, and all of those came in and helped shape and form the bid and the projects that would ultimately define the bid. As I mentioned, easy to ignore residents were at the core of our thinking. We were really thinking about cultural democracy and how people, communities, individuals can be commissioners and architects of their culture. So what do they bring to the table, and that cultural offer would be seen with equal merit to professional. So our key themes were around advancing social cohesion and citizenship through culture, addressing diversity in cultural leadership. We have a hugely diverse community. All of our cultural leaders, across the span of our cultural leaders, we don't see that. So we wanted to see how, through the London Borough of Culture, we could develop the next generation of cultural leaders from a more diverse perspective. And I don't just mean by ethnicity, I mean thinking about socio-economic groups as well. So thinking about how we really start to reflect society as it is today. We wanted to provide training and development. A strong theme was for training and development for young people, and that was facilitated, or would be facilitated, across the entirety of the programme, nurturing a new generation of creative and cultural entrepreneurs, or signposting up opportunities to develop their career in the cultural industries. And most importantly, and probably the theme that is the one that I'm particularly keen on, was thinking about how we could explore new models and approaches to working with residents and communities. So our programme focused around things like, we had the themes, the main programmes were, we had a series of pop-ups around Regent's Canal, thinking about the history of the canal, and Camden wouldn't be the borough that it is today without the presence of that canal, because it was the main communication route and acting as a conduit to the world, and the world into Camden. So really thinking and exploring that, working with people from the Rivers and Canals Trust, but also running a programme with young offenders and those at risk of offending, looking at how they understand the area, but how they also can add to the refurbishment of the physicality of that environment. So we were looking at skills development there. Echoes from the Birdcage was a project that we'd worked up with Dame Evelyn Glennie as the first King's Cross resident artist. And this would be a performed piece, but a performed piece that was workshopped through working with deaf and hard of hearing children, and engaging them in the creation of the work, but also its performance as audiences. Camden is open, and here we were really thinking about looking at how we could build capacity within communities to have community-led festivals and celebrations and cultural events. And so we had a commissioning pot there, and that would provide grants, if you like. Yeah. And then Camden's Creative Heroes was really a programme that was going to be targeted into our libraries, and starting to think about what's a library look like for the 21st century. Thinking about how they're used, how they might be used in the future, and thinking of them as repositories of digital content. That sort of thing. So those were the thing. Camden Alive, which is the project that we did get funding for, and we're very pleased to see to see that. So this project is going to take place on 12 estates throughout the borough, working with easy to ignore residents and communities, not just those exclusively, but targeting work with those, working with them as co-creators and producers of artworks and augmented reality artifacts. I don't know what happens. Augmented reality, I don't know what the word is after that. So what we hope to do through this project is we want to pilot new ways of working, engaging Camden's communities. We want to work with our cultural institutions, artists and augmented reality technologists and writers to develop unique cultural trails across Camden using art installation and the augmented reality technology to bring out unique stories from within those communities. So really, there'll be a physicality to it, but what we're thinking of is a Camden People's Museum, which is a virtual museum. It exists in virtual space rather than in physical space. So really, and that's the legacy is that's something that can be added to year on year. We also want to connect those communities with our cultural institutions, so because they're not accessing them at the moment. So how do we open up the doors of the British Library, the British Museum, the Roundhouse, for example, a whole raft of other things? How do we make those connections between those communities, and how do we use stories and creative expression as the vehicle to do that? So yeah, it will provide Camden residents with the opportunity to be architects of their own culture. So what are the components? Actually, I think I'm going to... Yes, Karen, good.